Hi there, and welcome back to LeadReads, the channel where we share powerful insights and personal growth lessons through great books. The story of the US dollar is the story of modern power itself. Kenneth Rogoff's Our Dollar, Your Problem explores how one currency became the backbone of global trade and why that dominance now stands on shaky ground. If you enjoy what you hear and want to dive deeper, we've included a link to the book in the description below. Now, let's get started. Published in 2025, Our Dollar, Your Problem explores the rise and dominance of the US dollar as the world's reserve currency, a position achieved through a unique mix of historical luck, strategic power, and economic influence. Yet, as Harvard economist Kenneth Rogoff argues, this dominance may not last forever. The once unshakable confidence in the almighty dollar is now facing unprecedented challenges, from China's yuan, the rise of digital currencies, to America's own fiscal overconfidence. Kenneth Rogoff is a professor of economics at Harvard University and a former chief economist at the International Monetary Fund, IMF. He is best known for his groundbreaking research on global financial crises, particularly his co-authored book, This Time is Different, written with Carmen Reinhart, a work considered one of the most influential economic studies of the 21st century. A global currency, a global dilemma. The story begins in 1971, the year President Richard Nixon abruptly ended the convertibility of the US dollar into gold. The decision shocked America's allies, especially European leaders, who had long believed that the dollar was as good as gold. When angry European ministers confronted US Treasury Secretary John Connally about the broken promise, he gave a cold, unforgettable reply. The dollar is our currency, but it's your problem. That single sentence perfectly captured the arrogance and imbalance of the modern financial order, a system that benefits America immensely while exporting instability and inflation to the rest of the world. The hidden costs of a strong dollar, the belief that a strong dollar ensures global stability, is, according to Rogoff, one of the greatest myths of modern economics. While it has cemented America's global influence, it has also destroyed manufacturing jobs across the U.S. heartland, inflated trade deficits, and strained foreign economies that must constantly adjust to U.S. monetary policy. Now, as digital currencies, de-dollarization movements, and China's expanding financial reach reshape the global landscape, Rogoff poses an unsettling question. Can America's dollar empire survive its own success? If you've ever wondered why the US dollar matters so much, or why every global crisis seems to circle back to Washington, this book offers a masterclass in understanding the intersection of money, power, and politics. It's not just an economic analysis, it's a geopolitical story about ambition, arrogance, and the fragility of financial dominance in a changing world. The road to dollar dominance. The status of a dominant world currency isn't like a sports trophy. It doesn't change hands every few years. Instead, it's a title that can last for centuries. And when transitions do happen, they unfold slowly, often with the old and the new currencies coexisting for decades. In the 16th century, Spain's Real de a Ocho, the pieces of eight, ruled global trade. By the 17th century, the Dutch florin, backed by silver, and the innovation of paper money took center stage. Then came the British pound, which reigned supreme from the Napoleonic Wars until World War I. And today, the US dollar stands as the undisputed champion, though, as Rogoff warns, it's entering its middle age. How the dollar took over the world. The dollar's dominance was not a coincidence. It was engineered. In 1944, at the Bretton Woods Conference in New Hampshire, global leaders built a new post-war financial order. Under this system, currencies were tied to the dollar, and the dollar itself was tied to gold. This made the US currency the anchor of the world economy. By 1950, America accounted for an astonishing 36% of global GDP, a scale of power no other nation had ever achieved in modern times. And with American goods, capital, and culture flooding the world, the dollar became not just a currency, but a language, the language of global trade. The network effect, why everyone uses the dollar. The dominance of the dollar today is not simply about strength. It is about habit and convenience. In a world with more than 150 currencies, it's far easier to trade using one universal medium. That's why nearly 90% of all foreign exchange transactions involve the US dollar on one side. About 60% of global central bank reserves are held in dollars. Roughly 80% of all oil trades are priced in dollars. In short, the dollar is the bloodstream of the global economy, and removing it would be like performing open heart surgery on the entire financial system. Rivals that tried to challenge the dollar. The victory of the Allies in 1944 didn't just mark the end of World War II, it marked the beginning of America's financial empire. But the dollar's path to supremacy was not without challengers. Over the decades, several contenders rose and fell. The Soviet ruble, a power built on illusion. In the 1970s, some economists actually believed the Soviet Union's ruble could rival the US dollar. The USSR was expanding rapidly, boasting massive dams, nuclear power plants, and a space program that awed the world. But beneath the surface, the system was brittle, too centralized, too inefficient, and too resistant to market reform. When Brezhnev attempted partial market reforms in 1964, the experiment collapsed under its own contradictions. Had those reforms succeeded, the ruble might have become a true global contender. Instead, it became a relic of a failed ideology. The Japanese yen, the rise and fall of a miracle. Japan's post-war economic miracle was breathtaking. 10% GDP growth per year through the 1960s, powered by world-class manufacturing and relentless innovation. By the 1980s, Japan was the world's factory, producing everything from Toyotas to Walkmans, and many predicted that the yen would one day replace the dollar. But then came the Plaza Accord of 1985. Under US pressure, Japan agreed to strengthen its currency to reduce America's trade deficit. The yen's value doubled in just 2 years, and Japan's export engine stalled. A strong yen turned out to be a double-edged sword, and the dream of yen dominance vanished. The euro, Europe's great hope, and its greatest flaw. The euro, launched in 1999, was Europe's boldest attempt to rival the dollar. It unified the economic strength of Germany, France, and other major economies into a single currency, backed by the largest trade bloc in the world. By 2008, the euro surged from 0.85 to 160, and some believed it could dethrone the dollar entirely. Then came the Greek debt crisis of 2010. Years of reckless borrowing and weak fiscal governance exposed the euro's fatal flaw. It had monetary union without fiscal union. Europe could share a currency, but not a budget. When crisis struck, there was no unified political mechanism to respond. Confidence in the euro plummeted, and with it, the hope of ending the dollar's reign. The dollar's secret weapon, trust. Every rival of the dollar, from the ruble to the yen to the euro, eventually stumbled on the same obstacle, trust. People, governments, and institutions trust the United States to honor its debts, maintain transparency, and enforce the rule of law. And in global finance, trust is more powerful than gold. For now, the dollar remains the world's anchor, not because it's perfect, but because no alternative has proven strong enough to replace it. The yuan and cryptocurrencies, challengers of the future. Two emerging forces are quietly shaking the foundations of the US dollar's supremacy: China's renminbi, RMB, and the rapid rise of digital currencies. Though radically different in nature, one driven by state power, the other by decentralization, both represent serious attempts to reimagine the global financial order. China's grand strategy: building a parallel financial empire. China's challenge is deliberate, systematic, and geopolitical. Through the Belt and Road Initiative, Beijing has spent the last decade financing infrastructure projects across Asia, Africa, and Latin America, not in dollars, but in renminbi. By structuring loans, contracts, and trade deals in its own currency, China has been slowly internationalizing the yuan. At the same time, Beijing has signed currency swap agreements with dozens of countries, allowing them to trade directly in RMB without touching the dollar-based SWIFT system. The launch of the digital yuan, a central bank-issued digital currency, is another strategic move, designed to bypass the Western-controlled payment rails altogether. And scale matters. China is now the world's second largest economy and the top trading partner of more than 120 nations. When Beijing and Moscow trade energy in yuan, or when Saudi Arabia considers accepting yuan for oil payments, it's not just economics, it's geopolitics in motion. Cryptocurrency, the people's alternative. If China's yuan is a state-backed challenger, cryptocurrency is the rebel that defies all states. Bitcoin, Ethereum, and other digital assets exist outside the traditional banking system, decentralized, borderless, and resistant to censorship. They offer an alternative vision, a global financial system that doesn't depend on any government or central bank. Despite volatility and speculation, crypto has captured a simple but powerful idea: money without borders. Countries under sanctions, citizens in hyperinflated economies, and investors seeking independence all find appeal in its freedom. El Salvador's controversial adoption of Bitcoin as legal tender is one such signal. Meanwhile, stablecoins, digital tokens pegged to fiat currencies, now facilitate billions of dollars in cross-border transactions daily, bypassing banks altogether. Neither the yuan nor cryptocurrencies have yet achieved the trust, scale, or network dominance of the dollar. But both have proven something critical. The world is hungry for alternatives. Living with the strong dollar. For most nations, the goal isn't to dethrone the dollar, it's to survive beside it. The most common strategy? Peg your currency to the US dollar and ride its stability, importing stability and risk. At first glance, this seems like a brilliant idea. Anchor your currency to the world's most stable reserve asset and you import its credibility. To do so, a central bank promises to exchange its domestic currency for dollars at a fixed rate backed by substantial dollar reserves. This fixed exchange rate regime can indeed bring short-term stability, reducing currency volatility, encouraging foreign investment, and taming inflation. But it's a fragile piece. When the underlying economy drifts too far from that fixed value, the entire system can collapse overnight. Mexico's miracle and meltdown. In 1988, facing inflation above 150%, Mexico boldly pegged its peso to the dollar. Initially, the results were miraculous. Inflation plummeted, growth surged, and foreign capital poured in. But by 1994, Mexico's current account deficit had ballooned to 8% of GDP, and the peso had become dangerously overvalued. When the peg finally broke in December 1994, the peso lost over half its value within weeks, triggering a deep recession, the infamous tequila crisis, Thailand, and the Asian financial crisis. A few years later, Thailand repeated the same pattern. Its central bank held the baht steady at roughly 25 per US dollar, fueling the boom of the Asian tigers. But by 1996, overheating, property bubbles, and a widening current account deficit made the peg unsustainable. In July 1997, speculators led by George Soros attacked the baht. Within days, Thailand's foreign reserves evaporated, forcing the government to devalue, igniting the Asian financial crisis that spread across the region. The double-edged nature of the dollar fixed exchange rates work until they don't. They offer stability, but at the cost of monetary independence. When things go wrong, the fallout is severe. Unemployment, capital flight, and shattered economies. This fragile setup leaves both sides exposed. The United States bears the burden of maintaining global monetary stability. Other nations surrender autonomy, trusting a system they cannot control. It's a delicate equilibrium, a global house of cards built on a single, powerful currency. The uncomfortable truth. For better or worse, the world still revolves around the dollar. It's the anchor, the lubricant, and the weapon of global finance. But as history shows, every empire of money carries within it the seeds of its own decline. The very success that builds it also makes it vulnerable. The enormous privileges of dollar dominance. The global dominance of the US dollar comes with undeniable risks, both for America and the rest of the world. For the United States, being the world's banker means living with an overvalued currency that can weaken exports. For everyone else, it means being subject to American monetary policy and even financial sanctions beyond their control. So, why doesn't the US give up this burdensome role? Because the benefits far outweigh the risks. The world's willing lender, perhaps the greatest advantage, is that the rest of the world happily holds America's debt. By mid-2024, foreign central banks held $6.7 trillion in US Treasury bonds, or $8.2 trillion if we include private investors. Why? Because the dollar remains the safest, most liquid asset on earth. This privilege, what economists call the exorbitant privilege, allows the US to borrow at lower interest rates than any other country. It's as if America possesses the world's cheapest credit card. US consumers and businesses enjoy lower borrowing costs. The government can fund massive spending programs with minimal constraint. The deficit without tears. This privilege explains why the US can run trillion-dollar deficits year after year without triggering a balance of payments crisis. Unlike other nations, America pays for imports in its own currency. When the US buys oil from Saudi Arabia or electronics from China, those transactions are denominated in dollars, IOUs, issued by the US itself. Essentially, the rest of the world sends America goods in exchange for paper promises because they trust those promises more than their own currencies. Financial power as geopolitical weapon, dollar dominance also translates directly into hard geopolitical power. By controlling the global payment system, Washington can cripple entire economies without firing a single bullet. When the US excludes a country from the dollar based SWIFT network, as it did with Russia after its invasion of Ukraine, the economic shock can be immediate and devastating. In the 21st century, the dollar has become America's most potent non military weapon: capital, growth, and the Fed's autonomy. The dollar's dominance ensures a steady inflow of capital into U.S. markets, fueling economic growth, though sometimes inflating asset bubbles. Most importantly, it grants the Federal Reserve a level of monetary independence no other central bank possesses. While other nations must worry about capital flight or exchange rate crises, the Fed can focus almost entirely on domestic economic conditions. That autonomy is both a luxury and a potential blind spot, privilege or burden. For now, American policymakers clearly believe the benefits still outweigh the risks. But this balance could shift as new challengers rise, and the cost of maintaining global stability grows heavier with each passing decade. A shaky future. What then could finally undermine the dollar's supremacy? According to Rogoff, the threats are not external, but internal, born from the very system that made the dollar powerful. Inflation, the immediate danger. Inflation is the most urgent and visible risk. The Federal Reserve's commitment to price stability has long anchored global trust in the dollar, but that independence is not guaranteed. Political pressure, populist agendas, or short-term growth priorities could push the Fed to keep interest rates artificially low, even when inflation looms. The temptation to print and spend is always strong and deeply dangerous. History offers a sobering reminder. In the 1970s, U.S. inflation surged above 10%. By 1980, it peaked at 13.5%. It took painful interest rate hikes above 20% to crush the spiral, plunging the country into recession. If a similar scenario were to unfold today, trillions of dollars in global reserves could evaporate overnight, triggering a worldwide sell-off of U.S. assets. The debt time bomb. Compounding this risk is America's ballooning national debt, now exceeding 33 trillion or 120% of GDP. As debt piles up, interest payments consume an ever larger share of the budget. Rising rates could push the U.S. into a fiscal trap, keeping rates low to avoid a debt crisis. While low rates fuel more inflation, it's a vicious cycle, one that could force the Fed to choose between protecting the dollar or saving the government from default. If the dollar falters, the consequences of a weakened or unstable dollar would be catastrophic. Global trade would fragment. The network effect that once cemented dollar dominance could unravel rapidly as confidence, the ultimate foundation of any currency, evaporates. America's exorbitant privilege could turn into an unbearable burden almost overnight. Since World War II, the dollar has been both America's greatest asset and its greatest illusion. It allowed the US to live beyond its means, financing endless deficits and global influence, while others bore the cost of its dominance. Yet beneath that empire lies fragility, high debt, inflationary temptation, and eroding trust could one day end the dollar's reign, not through conquest or competition, but through complacency. Rogoff leaves us with a warning worthy of history's pattern. Every currency empire believes it will last forever, until the moment it doesn't. Reading our dollar, your problem feels like standing at the edge of a financial empire, one built not on soldiers or ships, but on trust. Kenneth Rogoff doesn't just tell the story of the US dollar, he reveals how money itself became a form of power, politics, and psychology intertwined. What begins as an economic history ends as a quiet warning. No empire, not even one made of paper, lasts forever. Rogoff's analysis forces us to confront a paradox. The dollar's greatest strength is also its greatest vulnerability. Its dominance gives America unparalleled freedom to borrow endlessly, to shape global trade, to sanction nations without war. But this same dominance breeds overconfidence, a dangerous belief that trust, once earned, can never be lost. What struck me most was how fragile the system really is. The dollar's supremacy rests not on gold or oil, but on confidence, the collective belief that the US will remain stable, disciplined, and credible. If that belief cracks through debt, inflation, or political dysfunction, the world's financial foundation could shift faster than anyone expects. Rogoff also reminds us that challenges to the dollar aren't only coming from abroad. They come from within: unsustainable deficits, polarized politics, and an illusion that printing more money can solve real problems. In an age of digital currencies and rising multipolar power, that illusion may soon be tested. In the end, Our Dollar, Your Problem isn't just a book about economics. It is a mirror held up to global dependency. It asks every nation, including America itself, a simple but haunting question: what happens when the world stops believing in the dollar?